Hilchos Bikkurim Ushar Matnes Kahuna Shabagvulin Perek Revi'i. The laws of the Bikkurim, the first fruits, and all the other Kohanic gifts in Israel, chapter 4. Today we are dealing with, again, Bikkurim. This is the final day that we're going to be talking about Bikkurim, and then starting tomorrow we move on to the other gifts of the Kahuna. So the Rambam starts off with a little point from yesterday to lift us off into today's topic. We said yesterday, Halacha Aleph, says the Rambam, Kol Hamevi Bikkurim, that anybody who brings the first fruits, Ta'un Karban, Vishir, Utnufa Velina. He needs to have, yesterday we said 7 things, but the Rambam repeats 4 things out of the 7. He needs to bring a sacrifice, a special peace offering with the Bikkurim. He needs to have the song, which means that the Leviim have to sing Psalm 30 while they bring the Bikkurim. You have to wave it around, like you would wave any sacrifice, and you have to stay the night over in Jerusalem after you bring the Bikkurim. You stay the night. Aval Havidui, but the declaration, which we also spoke about yesterday, one of the 7 things was to say the declaration, to thank Hashem for the history of Israel, taking us out of Egypt, giving us the land of Israel and all of its fruit. That declaration is not equal to everybody that brings Bikkurim, because there are some people that have to bring the first fruits from their trees, but they do not, or they actually cannot, say the declaration over them. And that's going to be the main topic of today's parak, to talk about who should bring Bikkurim and read the declaration, and who should bring Bikkurim but cannot read the declaration. It says the Rambam Halacha Beis ve'elu mevi'in v'lo yikarin. The following people must bring Bikkurim, but they cannot read the declaration. Ha'isha, a woman, v'hatumtum, the blocked person, his genital area is blocked, you don't know if he's male or female. V'ha'androgynos, that's the hermaphrodite, he has both reproductive organs. Lefi shehein sfeik isha, these last 2 cannot bring because they may be a woman, they're in doubt whether they're a woman. And why can't a woman say the declaration? The very last words of the declaration are, thank you Hashem, I brought the fruit that you gave me. Women don't own a portion of land in Israel. Israel was apportioned to Jewish males. And so the woman cannot say that you gave it to me. Similarly, ha'apatrupin, a caretaker. That means, let's say if you have a father died. Yeah. Father passes away, the court will put up a caretaker to be in charge of the estate for the orphans. So one of the things he has to do is to bring their Bikkurim, but he cannot say the declaration. V'ha'eved, if a slave brings his master's Bikkurim, v'hashliach, even a regular agent, cannot do the reading. Because they cannot say, you gave it to me. Hashem didn't give it to them. The agent doesn't own the land, slave doesn't own the land, even the caretaker doesn't own the land. Halacha Gimel, Hager, nevertheless, a convert, Mevi v'koire, he could bring Bikkurim and read the declaration, even though seemingly he didn't get a portion in the land. Says the Rambam, Shenemer la'Avram, because way back when Hashem told Avram Avinu, Av hamoin goyim nesaticha, I have made you a father of many nations. Harehu av kol ha'olam kulay, shenichnasin tachas kanfei shechina. Avram became the father for the entire world. Anybody in the world who will come under the wings of the Shechina will be considered Avram's descendants. Ula Avram ha'isa hashvua tchila sheyirshu banav v'sa'aretz. The whole promise that was made, that Avram Avinu's children will inherit the land, was made to him. In other words, whoever is considered to be his children will be able to, so to speak, have a portion in the land. And since the convert is considered Avram's child, he's able to read the declaration of the Bikkurim as well. And there's a famous letter that Rabbi would always refer, that the Rambam himself wrote to a Jew whose name was Rabbi Ovadia, the Ger. He was a famous convert, Rabbi Ovadia, where the Rambam writes a very similar concept. He says, us Jews, maybe we can say, Elokei Avotenu, that God is the God of our fathers, because that's our claim to Hashem. We may not have a personal connection with Him, but our fathers, they stood at Mount Sinai. But you, he told the convert, you can say Hashem is your God directly, because you chose to come under the Shechina's wings. And so you have a much closer relationship to Hashem. So here too, the Ger literally is considered to have a portion in Israel because Avram is his father. Says halacha, so the Rambam continues, V'chein koyanim u'leviim, similarly, Kohanim and Leviim, Mevi'in v'kairin, they can bring the Bikkurim and read the declaration. Mipnei sheyesh lahen arei migrash, even though they don't have official inheritance in the land, but they have 48 cities that Hashem gave them that are called arei migrash, which we'll learn about in the next set of laws. And therefore, on account of that, they own some of the land and they can read the declaration. Halacha dalid, hakoyne shnei ilonos b'seich sada shel chaverei. If somebody buys 2 trees in his friend's property. So the other day we learned that if you buy 1 tree, you for sure don't own the land. If you buy 3 trees, you for sure own the land, and you can for sure bring the Bikkurim. What if you only buy 2 trees? You own 2 trees in your friend's field. Mevi ve'inei kaireh. It says that Rambam you have to bring the Bikkurim, but you cannot read the declaration. Why? Because when it came to 2 trees, the rabbis were in doubt whether you own the land. In order to read the declaration, you have to own the land. Otherwise, you can't say Asher Nasata Li Hashem. So with 1, you don't own the land for sure. With 3, you do for sure own the land. But with 2, we're in doubt. So bring the Bikkurim just in case it's yours. But you can't read the declaration. Says the Rambam, the Ketzad Oiseh. What does this guy do? It's not so simple just to say bring Bikkurim without reading it. You cannot bring something which is not holy into the temple courtyard. If the truth is that there's no obligation to bring Bikkurim, so forget the reading the declaration. You can't even bring the fruits. So what do? Says the Rambam, Makdish Oisam Tchila Lebedek Habayis. You should just, in case, out of doubt, you should consecrate them to the temple treasury. Because if you don't own the land and you don't have to bring the Bikkurim, then they might be chulin, they might be regular produce. You cannot bring ordinary produce into the temple courtyard. So you have to consecrate them. Now they're for sure holy. Either they're Bikkurim, or if they're not, they're consecrated. The Kohen who's receiving the Bikkurim, he needs to first redeem them from consecration. In other words, treat them as if they're not Bikkurim, they're simple hektish. So you have to buy them back. And then, and only then, can he eat them, because they may not be Bikkurim. So much so, he needs to separate Truma and Meiser gifts from the Bikkurim, because again, they might be ordinary produce. But you have to give all the Meiser, even the 10%, which usually belongs to the Levi. Here you can only give it to a Kohen, because maybe they're actual Bikkurim. You have to always worry about both sides. Maybe it's actual Bikkurim and it's forbidden to a non-Kohen. And the best workaround for this is not to bring such Bikkurim yourself. If you own 2 trees in another person's field, gather the Bikkurim, the first fruits, but don't bring them yourself. Send them with an agent, so that the reading becomes non-essential. You don't even have to do the reading, because when the agent brings it, there's no reading at all. Now, what's wrong with bringing it yourself? Says the Rambam, a very interesting halachic rule. Whenever something, some kind of Bikkurim, cannot have the declaration recited over it because of a particular doubt, so the reading becomes essential. And if you don't do the reading, it causes a problem. Therefore, you have to put yourself in a situation where the reading to begin with is not an obligation, which is only true in the case of an agent. Halacha Hey says that Rambam hifrish bikurav u'mochar sadehu. A person puts aside Bikkurim, and then before he has a chance to bring them to Jerusalem, he sells the field. Mevi ve'inei kaireh. He needs to bring the Bikkurim, but he cannot read the declaration. She'en le'yachol le'mar asher nosata li Hashem, because he'll no longer be able to say that you gave it to me, the land. Sharei ein lo, because right now you don't have the land. You already sold it. The buyer doesn't have to separate again Bikkurim from the same species, which the seller already separated from. If he did separate it, maybe he can bring it, because he's another person, but he cannot say the declaration. But if it's a different species, no problem. Put aside the Bikkurim, bring them, read the declaration, no issue. If one person brings in his own field 2 different species, then you can't say the declaration twice. But here, because it's 2 different people, the seller brought from one species, the buyer from a second species, they can both say the declaration, or the buyer can say the declaration in the second species. Halacha vav, hamoicher sadehu lepeiros. If somebody sells his field only for the fruit, that means I'm giving you just the fruit in my field. I'm not selling you the real estate. Halekeach mevi ve'einei kaireh. The buyer must bring the Bikkurim from those fruits, but he cannot read the declaration. Shekinyan peiros einei kekinyan aguf. Because in halacha we say that when you acquire just the produce, you don't actually acquire the body of the trees or of the land. Aval mevi adam minichsei ishtay bikurim v'kairei. But a person can bring from his wife's possession. Remember, in the laws of marriage, sometimes a woman can bring property into a marriage called nichsei maloik, where the woman owns it. The husband just uses the fruits. Says that Rambam, nevertheless, the husband can bring bikurim from his wife's possession and read it, afal pisha ein le guf hakarka, even though he doesn't own the body of the land. Shenemar, because the Torah says, Asher nasan lecha Hashem alekecha ule beisecha. Torah makes clear mention. You should be happy with that which Hashem gave you and to your household. So the wife is considered to be part of the household. And the Rambam adds even further, Afal pisha mesa ishta, achar shehifrish v'hu baderech, even if his wife passed away, after he put aside the Bikkurim while he's on the road, maybe v'koirei, he can still bring the Bikkurim and read it. What's the novelty? The Gemara explains, if the wife died on the road, then in a way, if you think about it, the fruit now transferred ownership. Instead of being owned by the wife, now it's owned by the husband. And when the ownership of the property changes, we're actually going to see in a second in a couple of halachas, if the owner of the property changes, then there's room to say that you cannot say the declaration. So one might think that in this case also you shouldn't say the declaration. So no. The husband and wife are considered to be one entity, and even if she dies, he can say the declaration. Halacha zayin hamoicher sadeyu. A person sells a field, is the karkan, or he sells some trees and the land around them, bisman shahayovel noyik, at the time when yovel was observed. And the next set of laws we're going to see, that one of the laws of yovel is that after every 50 years, all real estate that was sold during those 50 years goes back to its original owner. So a person sells a field or sells some trees. Technically speaking, the buyer never fully owns the land, because after 50 years, it's going back to the seller. Says the Rambam, nevertheless, during the first yovel, the first jubilee, the buyer can bring the bikurim and read the declaration, because 50 years is a long time. A person who sells his field during the first 50 years and he never actually saw a yovel being observed, he may not be so sure that it's actually going to come back. Maybe he heard the rabbis, they get the real estate back, but he doesn't trust the system so much. So during the first jubilee, the buyer is considered to be a full buyer, and the seller relinquished his ownership completely. So the buyer can bring the bikurim and read the declaration. Avalim chazaru machra b'yovel sheni, but if the seller resold it after getting it back during the first yovel, he sells it back in the second jubilee, now the buyer can only bring the bikurim but cannot read the declaration. Because clearly now the seller understands, he's already seen the process in action, so he understands that when he sells his land, he's only selling the fruit. The kinyan peiros einek a kinyan aguf, and acquiring the fruit is not considered acquiring the body of the land. Halacha ches hifrish bikurav v'chala. A person puts aside his bikurim and he gets sick, but not just sick. V'harehu mesukan. He's in danger, dangerously ill, mortally ill. Zeh shadoi liyarshay mevi ve'einei kairi. So clearly he cannot go to Jerusalem himself. He's in bed. So whoever is the next of kin, whoever is going to inherit him, should bring those bikurim on his behalf, but not read it. Still considered an agent because the guy's still alive. Hifrish bikurav v'shilchan biyad acher. A person puts aside bikurim, sends it in the hands of an agent. Umeis hashliach baderech, and the agent dies on the road. Afal pisha chazar hu vehevion, even if the owner takes back the fruit and brings them to Jerusalem, einei kairei. He cannot read the declaration. Shenemar, because it says v'lakachta uvasa, or some texts have vehevesa. You should take it and you should come, or you should bring. Which one do you have? You have vehevesa. Yeah. Either v'lakachta uvasa, v'lakachta vehevesa. The point is, Torah says you should bring it, you should take it, and you should bring it. Ad shetia lekicha v'hava ka'achas. The taking and the bringing have to be as one. Originally, in this case, you took it in the hands of the agent. Now you want to bring it yourself? That doesn't work. This is the halacha that we were relying on in the previous halacha about the husband and the wife. That it says if the wife would die, it would be like the wife is taking and the husband is bringing. So over there it was different, but over here we apply this principle, and once the agent dies, you cannot bring the bikurim again. Halacha tes hifrish bikurav v'avdu kaidem sheyagia laharabayis. If a person puts aside his bikurim and they got lost before he reached the Temple Mount. So we said the other day, in this case, you have to separate again bikurim, the hifrish acherim tachteyan. He listened, he put aside other bikurim instead of them. Mevi hashniyim ve'einei kairei. Now, even though he has to bring the second produce, but he cannot read the declaration. You cannot say, I'm giving you the first of the fruit. They're not the first. The first ones got lost. You're bringing the second ones just to replace them. But they're not the first. The elu hashniyim, additionally, these second fruit, ein chayavim aleihen chemesh kibikurim. Unlike regular bikurim, where if you eat them by mistake, you have to pay them back plus a fifth. For these ones, you don't have to add the fifth, because they're not fully considered to be bikurim. Halacha yud hevi bikurav v'nitmu ba'azara. If you brought bikurim and they became impure in the temple courtyard, noiftzam sham ve'einei kairei. Says the Rambam, you have to pour them out right there on the floor, and you don't read the declaration. Noifitz even means like pour it out forcefully to actually show that it became impure. The commentaries debate. Yeah, commentaries debate what you do with it afterwards. The Ravid says that you should leave it to rot in the temple courtyard, and some say that's the Rambam's opinion also. But the problem with that is it's not honorable. You leave it on the floor.
It brings.
Yeah, it's dirty. It's because it's smelly.
Oh, you can bring,
It can bring bugs. Yeah. So others say, based on the Rambam earlier, that you have to burn them. You pour them out and you burn them. Halacha Yud Aleph hevi bikurav me'echad min haminim v'kara. A person brings bikurim from one species and he does the declaration. V'chazar v'hevi bikurim mimin acher. Then he brings again from a different species bikurim. Einei kairei alein. This second time he cannot read the declaration. Shenemar higadati hayoin, because the declaration says, where is it? Oh, here he's reading it twice, right? So higadati hayoin. I say today. That means pam achas b'shana hu magid v'lei shtayim. You can only say it once a year, not twice a year. Halacha Yud Beis hifrish bikurav v'yava shamayim. If he puts aside bikurim, and then the spring which was feeding his tree dries up, or the tree where the produce was on gets cut down. Maybe you can bring the bikurim, but you cannot read. Because it's like you don't have any land. Land got lost, in a way. If there's no irrigation, or if there's no tree, there's no more produce. Yesterday we learned, or 2 years ago we learned, that Bikkurim is only brought from Shavuos till Chanukah. But the truth is that there's 2 time frames within this time frame. From Shavuos till Sukkot, that's the ideal time frame. But if a person brings Bikkurim from after Sukkot till Chanukah, Afal Pisha Hifrishan Kaidem Mechak, even if he put them aside before Sukkot, Mevi Ve'einei Kaidei. He brings the Bikkurim but no declaration. Shanemar, because it says V'samachta v'chol ha'toif. You need to rejoice with the good. Ve'ein kriya ela b'shas simcha, meaning you can only read when it's a happy time. Mechag HaShavuos ad soif ha'chag, when you're actually harvesting and gathering your produce from Shavuos till Sukkot. After Sukkot, it's not called the happy time. Ushara mevi'in chutz me'elu, mevi'in b'kairin. Anybody else who brings bikurim, besides for this list we just gave, has to bring the bikurim and read the declaration. Says the Rambam Malacha Yudalet habikurim v'hatrumais v'hachala. All the food which the Kohen gets, first fruits, the truma, first dough, which we'll begin learning about tomorrow, the hakeren v'hachemesh. If somebody eats truma inadvertently, they pay back the principal and the fifth. The Kohen gets that money. Umatnis behema, all the gifts that a Kohen gets from every animal that's slaughtered. Heim nichse kohen, they become the personal possessions of the Kohen. Yesh le'liknis mehen avadim bekarkois ubehema tmeya. He can buy with them whatever he wants. He can buy slaves, he can buy real estate, even non-kosher animals. Ubal chayv noitlan bechayva, he can pay them back a debt. He can use the money to pay back a debt. V'hal isha biksubasa, he can pay his wife her ketubah with this money. The kaina bahen sefer Torah. He can even buy a Torah scroll, which, as the commentaries explain, you can't sell a Torah scroll. So if he buys it, he won't really be getting any benefit from it, technically speaking, any financial benefit. Nevertheless, it's his money, he can do with it as he pleases, even buying a sefer Torah. Halacha tezvav afal pisha bikurim b'hatruma asur lehe achel azarim. Even though bikurim and truma, here's those things, bikurim and truma, cannot be eaten by a non-Kohen. Ta'afal pisha bikurin oilin be'echad umeyo kitruma. And even though bikurim, if they get mixed in with other things, they can be nullified in 1 to 100. Imnis arvu bechulin birushalayim. If they get mixed in other ordinary produce while they're in Jerusalem, asurin bekol shehin beminam. If they got mixed with the same species, it forbids the entire mixture, even at the smallest amount. K'maiser sheni, like the second tithe. Because it's in Jerusalem, where they're going to be eaten, asa'um kedavar sheyesh le'matirin. The Torah treats it like what's called davar sheyesh le'matirin, something which can become permitted. The Kohen, technically speaking, could eat the whole mixture in a state of ritual purity. So therefore, it has an extra power of prohibition, it doesn't get nullified in the regular way. Even though Bikkurim are forbidden to non-Kohanes, even in Jerusalem, still they forbid the mixture with the smallest amount, because the Kohen could eat them in a state of purity. Even if you sow, you plant the Bikkurim after they come into Jerusalem, whatever grows is forbidden. And those growths will also forbid the smallest mixture if they got mixed into other things in Jerusalem. But whatever, if you plant Bikkurim before they come into Jerusalem, then what grows is ordinary produce, not holy. Halacha Tezayin, the Rambam concludes this chapter by describing the process of the Bikkurim. Keitzad mailinus ha-Bikkurim. How would it work? How would the Jews bring their Bikkurim to the temple? Kol ha'ayares shebemaimat. All the cities in one region, miskanseis le'irei shel maimat, would go into the main city of the region. We're going to explain in the next book of the Rambam that the same way the Kohen and Levite families were divided into 24 groups, one group serving per week, the rest of the Jews in Israel were also divided in 24 groups. And each week, a different group would gather in a central city in a region, and they would conduct special prayer services to correspond to the service being done in the temple. So every region was called the Maimed. So all the cities of the region would get together in the central city, so they shouldn't ascend as single individuals. It's important to do it in a big group. Shanemar birov am hadras melech. Right? It says with a multitude of nations is the beauty of the king. The more people you have, the more honorable it is for Hashem. Ubayim vilanim bircheva shalir. And they would come and they would sleep in the central square of the city to get ready for the next day. It shouldn't go into the homes because there might be some impurity there, which may become impure from a corpse, let's say. So we don't want to risk it. Ubashachar, in the morning, hamemuna oimer, whoever was appointed would announce, Kumu v'na letzion al Hashem alekeinu. Let's get up and let's go towards Zion, to Hashem our God. And all the Jews would gather. The hashoyer hoylech lifneim, a big ox would walk in front of them. The karnav mitzupin zahav, its horns would be glazed or painted with gold. The atara shel zayis b'reishay, with a wreath, a crown of olive leaves around its head or on its head. To publicize the fact that Bikkurim were coming from the 7 species, including olives. Olives are the most important one. There's a flute that would play as they would walk, until they reached nearby to Jerusalem. The whole way they would go, they would read Psalm 122. Samachti ba'imrim li beis Hashem nelech. They would say, I'm happy when they told me we're going to the house of Hashem. They would only walk for 2/3 of the day, so more people can accompany them and gather and add to their group. Once they reached close to Jerusalem, they would stop. They would send agents to Jerusalem to let them know that they're coming. While they were stopped outside of Jerusalem, they would decorate their Bikkurim and beautify them. At this point, if they had fresh produce and dry produce, they would arrange that the fresh produce should be on top. The hapachos, the hasgonim, the hagizbarim, yotzim likrasam Yerushalayim, and all the important people. Pachos is like governors, and sganim is like treasurers, or gizbarim is another type of treasurer. Here they say leaders and priests. They would all come out from Jerusalem to greet the Jews. Lefi habayim hem yotzim. According to the amount of people coming, the delegation going out would be bigger. Im bao anashim harbe yotzim likrasam rabim, v'im ma'at. Lots of people came, lots of people would go out. A little people would go out. Once everybody enters the gates of Jerusalem, they would begin to say, the next verse, our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. Yud Zayin, while they're in Jerusalem, all the artisans that were working on the streets of Jerusalem have to stand up. Usually, when a Torah sage walks by, you have to stand up. But if you were an artisan working, you didn't have to stand up because it causes loss to your work. But here, when the Jews came in with their Bikkurim, all the artisans would stand up. They would ask them how they're doing. Achenu, our brothers, anshe makim pleini, men of so and so the place. Bayachem b'shalom, welcome, come in peace. They would keep walking in Jerusalem with the flute playing before them, till they reach Temple Mount. Once they reach Temple Mount, like we said yesterday, every individual would take his basket on his shoulder, and they would read Psalm 150, the last chapter of Tehillim, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, praise Hashem in His holy place, Ad Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah, until the last verse, which says every living soul should praise Hashem. They would keep reading the psalm as they walked through the Temple Mount, Ad Shemagin LaAzara, till they reached the temple courtyard. Higiu LaAzara, once they came into the temple courtyard, so now it was the Levites' turn to take over. Dibru HaLeviim Bashir, the Leviim would begin to sing, Mimcha Hashem, Kidi Lisani V'Gomer, Psalm 30, I exalt you Hashem, for you have raised me up, etc. And then they would do the Bikkurim ceremony as we described it yesterday.